We often think about super cold temperatures, cryogenics, as something, well, maybe just for labs, or perhaps keeping food fresh.
Yeah, that's the common idea.
But here's something that might be a bit surprising. This tech, dealing with these really extreme lows, it actually plays a huge role in creating the stuff of our modern world.
Mm-hmm.
Think about fiber optic cables for the internet, or those tiny semiconductors in our phones.
Right.
Cryogenics is often right there in the manufacturing process.
Mm.
It's a much wider reaching than you might think.
It really is.
And that's exactly where we're putting our focus today.
Absolutely. And you've pulled together some really interesting documents for us here. We've got financial reports, an IPO prospectus, a ratings assessment.
Yep.
So as always, our mission is to kind of wade through this, pull out the most important bits for our listeners, get clarity without getting lost in the weeds.
Precisely. And the company we're zooming in on today is Inox India Ltd. We're going to get into their business in the cryogenic equipment world, look at their recent financials, and explore what the data might suggest about where they're headed.
Sounds good.
So where's the best place to start unpacking this?
Well, I think to really get it, we first need to understand where Inox India stands in this pretty specialized industry.
Okay.
According to the Chrysler report, back in fiscal year 2023, they were actually the largest supplier and exporter of cryogenic equipment in India.
The largest, based on revenue.
That's right, based on their revenue figures for that year.
Okay, that's a pretty big deal.
Oh.
And they're not exactly new kids on the block, are they? They've got history within the Inox group structure.
Exactly. Significant history as part of the restructured group, which points to a lot of experience there.
Now, when we say cryogenic equipment, could you maybe paint a clearer picture? What does that actually cover? It sounds quite technical.
It is specialized, yeah, but the range is actually quite broad. You've got your big cryogenic storage tanks, transport tanks.
Right, for moving super cold stuff.
Precisely. Essential for things like liquefied natural gas, LNG. But they also do smaller microbulk tanks, even disposable cylinders sometimes.
Huh, disposable.
Yeah. And beyond just tanks, they're into infrastructure, too. Building LNG fuel stations, LCNG stations,
LCNG.
liquefied to compressed natural gas.
Got it.
And they're also moving into, really cutting-edge areas like liquid hydrogen storage tanks.
Liquid hydrogen. Yeah, that definitely sounds like the future.
It's a key area.
And it's not just about energy, is it? I noticed in the materials they also do cryogenic biological storage.
That's right, for medical uses, research,
Yeah.
that sort of thing. And even beverage kegs.
Beverage kegs. Okay, didn't see that coming. Quite a mix then.
It really is a diverse portfolio. And then look at the industries they serve. That makes the scope even clearer.
Like which ones?
Well, take the cement industry. They can use natural gas stored cryogenically to help cut emissions.
Okay.
Or the fertilizer industry, natural gas is a key feedstock for making ammonia, and cryogenics handles the gas.
Right, the docs mentioned natural gas was preferred for ammonia there.
Yeah.
And then consumer durables and electronics.
Huh.
That wasn't an obvious link for me.
Yeah, it's maybe less intuitive, but think about it. Cryogenic gases are vital in manufacturing things like fiber optics, flat panel displays,
Yeah, right.
the integrated circuits, the semiconductors that are in basically everything electronic now.
So this seemingly niche tech underpins a lot.
A huge amount. Then you've got dairy, milk products, using cryogases for cooling, packaging, extending shelf life, metallurgy, oil and gas, chemicals. They all rely heavily on these technologies for different processes, often linked to being more efficient or greener.
So Inox India isn't just serving one niche. They're plugged into a whole network of really essential industries.
Definitely.
And their reach goes beyond India too, doesn't it? I saw mentions of global activity.
Absolutely. In just the 6 months up to September 30th, 2023, they exported to 66 different countries.
66, wow.
Yeah. And they have sales offices set up in Brazil and the Netherlands. So a clear international push.
In manufacturing, where's that based?
Mainly in Gujarat. They have facilities in Kailul and the Kandla Special Economic Zone, plus another plant in Silvassa.
Okay, so we've got a handle on their market position, their reach. Pretty significant. How does this translate financially? Let's get into the numbers.
Right, the financials. Looking at the recent performance, the trend is definitely growth. Consolidated revenue from operations, It jumped quite a bit in fiscal 2022.
How much?
Reached 7,827 million, roughly. That was up nearly 32% from the year before.
Okay, solid growth.
And that momentum carried into fiscal 2023. Revenue climbed again to about 9,651 million, another jump, just over 23%.
That's impressive consistency year on year. What about profit? Did that keep up?
Yeah, interestingly, their profit after tax margins, the PAT margins, they've stayed pretty stable even with that growth.
Really? What were they?
Fiscal 21 was about 15.8%. Fiscal 22 was 16.2%. And for the first 6 months of fiscal 24 ending September 23, it was a healthy 17.8%.
So margins actually improved slightly recently.
Looks like it. And the actual profit figure for fiscal 23 was 1,527 million. That's up about 17% from the previous year.
So profitability is definitely growing alongside that top line.
Correct. It shows they're not just expanding, but doing it efficiently.
Now, something else that jumped out was their order book figure.
Oh.
Over 10,000 million rupees as of last September.
Ah, yes, the order book. 10,366 million as of September 30th, 2023.
What does that tell us?
That's a really key indicator for their near-term future. It basically represents expected revenue from contracts they've already signed but haven't finished executing yet.
So it's like a pipeline of future work.
Exactly. A future revenue pipeline. A strong order book like that suggests, solid ongoing business and gives good visibility into what earnings might look like.
So a lot of work already locked in. And
Yep.
You mentioned exports earlier being important. How much do they contribute?
They play a very significant part in the revenue mix. Being competitive internationally is clearly one of their strengths.
Okay. And any other financial metrics worth noting?
Yeah, beyond just revenue and profit, things like ROCE, or return on capital employed, and ROE, return on equity, look pretty sound.
Which tells us.
They give you a sense of how effectively the company's using its capital and shareholder money. Those plus their net debt to equity ratio as of September 23 paint a picture of decent financial management.
Right.
Oh, and just a small detail, the reports also mention the proposed fee for their statutory auditors, SRBC & Co., for the next fiscal year.
Good to note. So looking ahead now, what are the main things expected to drive more growth for Inox India?
Well, the future outlook seems pretty positive, mainly driven by this big global push towards cleaner energy.
Makes sense.
Both the prospectus and the CRISIL report really emphasize the expected increase in demand for cryogenic gear as the world shifts more to fuels like LNG and, importantly, hydrogen.
Hydrogen. That name keeps coming up. It feels like a really central piece of their future strategy.
It absolutely does. I mean, there's still projected growth in LNG. CRISIL expects global demand to grow 5–6% yearly up to 2025, hitting maybe 480–500 million tons a year.
Which is huge.
It is. And Inox India is definitely positioned for that. But they seem to have a very strong focus on hydrogen as the next big thing.
How so?
What's really interesting is how early they got into the hydrogen space. They actually made India's first trailer-mounted hydrogen transport tank.
Really? Who for?
In collaboration with ISRO, the Indian Space Research Organization.
Wow, okay. That's a serious project. Shows capability.
Exactly. It demonstrates their technical chops, so they're not just waiting for the market, they're actively developing the equipment needed for hydrogen.
Like what kind of equipment?
The whole chain, really.
Yeah.
Cryogenic gear specifically for hydrogen storage, transport, distribution. They clearly see the long-term potential there.
Right.
And alongside that, their strategy also involves just continuing to expand geographically and pushing their standard equipment into more international markets.
So a two-pronged approach. Capitalize on existing tech internationally and be at the forefront of hydrogen.
That seems to be the plan. A pretty well-defined strategy for both established and these emerging clean energy areas.
Okay, that covers the business and growth outlook. Let's shift gears slightly. There were some major corporate events recently, right? The IPO.
Yes, the initial public offering, that was significant. It was structured purely as an offer for sale, or OFS.
Offer for sale.
Meaning the money raised from selling those shares in the IPO didn't go into the company's bank account.
Ah.
Instead, it went to the existing shareholders, promoters, perhaps early investors who were selling part of their stake.
So it was about providing an exit or liquidity for them and maybe getting the company listed publicly?
Precisely. The shares had a price band, they were offered, and now they trade on both the major Indian stock exchanges, BSE and NSE.
Got it. What about other corporate governance points from the documents? Any highlights?
Yeah, a few key things. SRBC & Co. LLP were appointed as the statutory auditors for a 5-year term. That takes effect after their next annual general meeting, the AGM.
Okay.
And speaking of the AGM, the documents lay out the whole e-voting process for shareholders.
Makes participation easier, I guess.
Yeah. Gives the record date June 6th, 2024, and the voting window, June 10th to 12th. It even breaks down how to log in depending on if you hold physical shares or electronic ones.
Pretty detailed. What about the board structure?
They detail the board composition, mentions 4 independent directors, and the chairman is a non-executive promoter director.
Oh.
It also outlines the roles of key committees, like the Audit Committee and the Nomination and Remuneration Committee, standard but important governance structures.
Right, oversight functions.
And interestingly, it notes that no whistleblower complaints were received during the year.
Which can be a positive sign about the internal culture, potentially.
It often is, yeah.
Yeah.
And beyond pure governance, there seems to be a focus on broader responsibilities, too.
Like what?
Well, they state a clear commitment to health, safety, and environment HSE standards and wider sustainability goals.
Let's get that up.
They hold several ISO certifications, 9001 for quality, 14001 for environmental management, and 14001 for occupational health and safety. That shows adherence to international standards.
Okay, that's tangible.
They also highlight their in-house engineering team focusing on new product development, which is obviously crucial in a tech field like this.
Innovation driver.
Exactly. And finally, they also note their spending on corporate social responsibility, CSR activities, for the last fiscal year.
Okay, so it sounds like they're ticking boxes for governance and broader responsibilities. Now, obviously, no business is without risks. Do the documents touch on potential challenges?
Yes, definitely. The IPO prospectus, as you'd expect, has a section on forward-looking statements.
Standard disclaimer.
Standard, but important. It explicitly says these statements involve risks and uncertainties. It hints at potential issues like disruptions in manufacturing,
Okay.
a certain dependence on a limited number of key customers,
It's always a risk.
the competitive landscape they operate in, reliance on key managers and technical staff,
People risk.
and, of course, potential swings in raw material prices or availability. Plus, exposure related to performance guarantees on some projects.
Right. So it's crucial for listeners to know these are potential hurdles the company itself acknowledges in its filings.
Absolutely. Standard practice to list them, but important context.
Okay. So as we start to wrap up this deep dive,
Well,
what would you say are the main takeaways from digging into Inox India?
I think we've seen a company that's clearly a leader in its home market, the Indian cryogenic equipment space.
Yeah, the #1 position.
Right. And they've shown consistent, strong financial growth recently. Their strategic bet on clean energy, both LNG and particularly hydrogen, seems to position them well for what's coming. And then the recent IPO, alongside what appears to be solid corporate governance, kind of marks a new chapter for them.
It really is one of those aha moments when you connect the dots, isn't it? You realize just how many different industries rely on this, well, seemingly very specialized field of cryogenics.
It's surprisingly pervasive.
And Inox India is playing a pretty central role, not just in India, but increasingly, it seems, around the world.
Which really raises an interesting point for listeners to maybe think about. You know, as this global shift towards cleaner energy picks up speed, the demand for the kind of specialized kit that Inox India makes, well, it's likely only going to become more important, wouldn't you say?
Seems logical. And building on that, here's maybe a final thought to leave everyone with. As the world gets even more serious about sustainability, how might these cryogenic technologies become even more woven into our daily lives, our industries, perhaps in ways we can't even quite picture yet?